One of the questions that remains unanswered, even though this is a painful closure for the families of those 38 Indians who were killed by the ISIS, is what stops India from joining that fight against ISIS? For more on that, we're joined in by Arun Singh, former ambassador to the United States, also Rachit Ranjan, strategic affairs analyst. Coming to you first, Ambassador, help our viewers understand what is stopping India, given that there have been scores of Indians packing their bags, making their way to Iraq, seeking a better future. 39 of those were killed by the ISIS. What is stopping India from joining hands in the fight against the ISIS?
So there are many ways to join hands in the fight. One, as some people suggest, that you have boots on the ground, and that may not be the most productive way because there are already enough boots on the ground. And you have to look at your own effectiveness and impact when you're there on the ground. And boots on the ground has its own complications. But then you can participate through sharing of intelligence, sharing of information. There is also a huge campaign going on in the cyberspace because, as you know, ISIS recruits a lot of people through the cyberspace. And therefore, whatever you can do to work to prevent radicalization, to work for de-radicalization, that is also in a way contributing to dealing with the challenge of ISIS. And as you know, today, with the effort that has been made over the past years, the territory controlled by ISIS has really shrunk. And it's a whole new situation, new challenge that people are dealing with there, the different groups who have been fighting against ISIS, who are now fighting against each other. What kind of post-conflict resolution do you work out to the situation in Syria? So I would say, from India's point of view, clearly, whatever is happening in West Asia, in the Middle East, has an impact on us because we are a neighboring country. We have more than 8 million people living in the Gulf. But we have to see what is our most effective way of participating rather than being present in every way possible.
All right, let me just take a cue from that and take that across to Rachit. As Ambassador is mentioning, there are many ways of joining hands in the fight against the ISIS, specifically, Rachit. You've also researched extensively over the last few years. One of the outcomes of your research was a paper that you filed 3 years ago. Has anything changed since then?
Thanks for having me, Molly. I think I agree with Ambassador saying that boots on ground is not an option. We should not exercise military adventurism over here because we have much bigger problems closer to home. Having said that, since the time I wrote the paper, the situation on the ground has changed significantly. If you look at it, ISIS has ceded 98% of its territory on account of the onslaught by US troops and the Russian troops. And if you look at it, there are two main cities, Raqqa and Mosul. They have diminished presence in those cities as well. But what one must bear caution over here is that ISIS should not be viewed as a purely territorial project. What it has managed to do is it has rejuvenated the global jihadist movement. And it has used innovative tools to recruit people. In fact, there is a researcher by the name of Charlie Winters from the International Center on Study of Radicalization, who has done an extensive research on the propaganda tools that are used by ISIS. In fact, last year in the month of Shawwal, in a 30-day period, ISIS produced 892 unique units of propaganda that range from radio bulletins to pamphlets. The list goes on. And contrary to popular belief, the propaganda tool is not something that glorifies brutality. It's rather offering the disenchanted youth across the world a utopian land where they can come and they can exercise their rights and they can have a good life. Then that's been the lure of ISIS as an organization. Having said that, there are a slew of measures that the Indian intelligence agencies have been taking over the course of the past 3 years. I think where we need to expend more effort is offering a very, very strong counter-narrative in the online space, especially if you look at the social media. It's increasingly being termed as a radical fundamentalist mosque for ISIS, where it has started recruiting people through various innovative means, which includes using the dark web, using apps like Telegram, and also using a particular technique called steganography, where they send messages on Reddit and eBay to help with recruitment. So these are the issues that need to be closely monitored. And on top of that, this counter narrative that has to be provided. We need more moderate leaders to come on the online space and provide this counter narrative.
Okay, Ambassador, let me also get you in on the aspect of how seriously do you think the Indian government and the authorities are viewing ISIS as a threat?
From the information I have, it's clear that the Indian government and authorities view it as a serious threat. But then the challenge in India has been much less than what you see elsewhere.
Okay.
Some time ago, they were referring to maybe about 100 people or so in India who may have been radicalized in this way. At that time in France, there were about 1,000 who had been radicalized. In Germany, there was a similar number. In the United Kingdom. So the problem of radicalization of local people by the ISIS propaganda, by the ISIS outreach, has been far more effective in Europe and some other countries than in India. So although we have a problem, it is far more intense elsewhere. But as was just mentioned, I think the real way to deal with this challenge is to promote the counter-narrative, to work for counter-radicalization, for de-radicalization. And you may recall that when the King of Jordan was here, for instance, several weeks ago, he has addressed a major event dealing with de-radicalization. So other countries around the world are dealing with that. The Indian government has also emphasized the aspect of de-radicalization. And another point which you mentioned and also was mentioned by the Minister of State, General V.K. Singh, the work of illegal travel agencies, that must also be addressed, because aside from the challenge that we are facing from ISIS, what this incident has shown is that a large number of Indians, through the lure provided by illegal travel agencies, are going to countries working in conflict situations. And even when there is an opportunity to move out of those places, very often they don't move out and expose themselves to danger. So both aspects need to be addressed.
Absolutely, and as even today, as you pointed out, the minister has categorically stated that a lot needs to be done on the front of tackling these agencies that con job seekers across the world. And also, there have been advisories, for that matter, that have been issued by the government time and again, warning people against these agencies as well. Rachit, coming to you lastly, before we wrap this up, to what extent do you think the government needs to, as the ambassador said, also promote the counter-narrative besides working on a policy of de-radicalization? Because let's face it, of course, there are Indians as recently as last year who were reportedly making their way from Kerala to Iraq and Syria. There are various attempts that are being made to radicalize Indians. What is the threat on the latter part of it as compared to the Indians who are traveling outside of India and being killed by terror outfits?
So we have to look at it in a holistic manner, and you know, in light of this incident, unfortunate incident, we cannot have a knee-jerk reaction to this, and that's where any intervention has to be done in a very, very calibrated manner, and our intelligence agencies are well equipped to handle these sort of exigencies. Having said that, I do believe that, and I agree with Ambassador Singh, that even if you look at the propaganda data, most of the propaganda is targeted at Western countries or countries in North Africa, and there is very little propaganda that is targeted at India. But Kerala of late has emerged as a fertile ground for what may be termed as Salafi jihadism. And that's where closer monitoring of the situation is required, where we need to work closely with ulemas, follow probably the Singapore model over here, where there are state-appointed ulemas who offer this counter-narrative at scale. Because dealing with this issue on a one-on-one, case-by-case basis will not be possible. The other point that we need to look at is the countries that are most susceptible to fundamentalism across, close to the Indian border, which is country like Bangladesh. And given the fact that the border between Bangladesh and India is extremely porous, I think India needs to take a much stronger stance in getting Bangladesh to act more swiftly on tackling fundamentalism in the country, and at the same time mentor them to suggest how to execute de-radicalization efforts. India has had immense success in executing de-radicalization programs, and that is a program that India can not only share with a country like Bangladesh, but also share these findings with developed countries. Okay. The third and the last thing over here is on intelligence sharing.
Yes, go ahead.
And on intelligence sharing, if you look at it, India has been sharing good intelligence with all the developed countries, but I think what's been the problem here is that a country like United States has always complained that intelligence sharing has been a one-way street where we have shared all the intelligence. But if you look at the counter-narrative from India, India says that US only shares the intelligence which is otherwise available through other sources, right, and keeps the most prized intelligence for itself, okay, while expecting us to share a significant amount of intelligence gathered. So we need to see eye to eye on those issues.
Certainly a holistic approach, and several of those facets, as we just discussed, need to be worked upon. That does answer a lot of the questions that have been doing the rounds when it comes to India's fight against the ISIS. We're going to leave it there for the moment. Ambassador Arun Singh and Rachit Ranjan.